Welcome to Attachment Matters, a series of conversations between two moms who love to nerd out on the subject of attachment. We'll dive into what it is, what it isn't, what it relates to, what it can mean for parenting, and how it can help us explain the current state of things.
As mothers, both of us found ourselves entangled in the world of gender ideology, following very different routes to get here. What we share in common is how the attachment framework has helped us to untangle these threads and better understand and fulfill our responsibilities as mothers in both the beauty and the challenge of these times.
In this last episode of Season 1, Rose and I discuss how life's painful and unfair surprises play an important role in our maturation process. Whether they'll lead us to develop more adaptation, grace, and capacity for connection may depend on how much access we have to our feelings and tears. And sometimes it's these very same tragic circumstances that help us discover the soft places in us. We also explore how wrong can be right, and that ultimately we'll be challenged to stretch ourselves to make room for those we love.
So, this is going to be our last official episode of what we now can call season one of Attachment Matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think our hope for today is to just sort of, see this as sort of a tying up of what we've talked about and what we've done so far, and some remaining pieces that have come out in terms of things we want to address before we say see you soon and take a little
Mm-hmm.
break for
Mm-hmm.
November and December, and hoping to come back with season two sometime early in the new year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This one will actually be publishing the end of November.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, sounds good. We had quite the pre-recording conversation today.
We sure did. We had a whole episode that we didn't record.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. Lots of attachment related stuff,
Yeah.
which so much of human stuff is.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like the theme of what what we shared together was this idea of, obviously we're here doing this because we feel like there's so much to be gained
Hmm.
from insights, kind of from this, like, that whole, what I would call, like, Dr. Neufeld, the distinctive of his approach, which is like shifting out of what do I do to what do I see.
Hmm.
And so it's like we wouldn't be here doing this podcast if we didn't believe that there's so much to be gained through developing insight, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think the theme of what we just covered was like, no matter how hard we then try to do things right, life is going to have its way.
Yes. Yes. With all of us. Yeah. Yeah. And, we talked too a little bit about how it's really through the pain. The pain is integral to the maturation process. It
Yeah.
is what adapts us. It is what
Mhm.
our design um, is meant for.
Yeah. Yeah.
The life is hard,
Hmm.
and so we adapt to the difficulty.
Yeah.
We think we've made life easier and easier and easier. So it's interesting
Hmm.
what will
Hmm.
what will show up in our lives to remind us that we're human,
Yeah.
that will humble us
Yeah.
and ensure um, adaptation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I know there's a few different stories I want to share, but I think about right now what comes to me when you say that is a very current story of my life, which is that my younger brother has this like very significant health challenge. And it's something that, he's going to the best doctors for, you know, and they haven't figured it out.
Mm,
And this is a man who has done everything right in his life. I mean, as a child, he like lined up the baseball bobbleheads in perfect order on his
hmm.
shelf and dusted them like out of his own volition. It wasn't something that was coerced for him to do or told by my parents for him to do. This is just, he has lived this neatly ordered life. I wake up at this time every single day. I eat this exact same breakfast. I do my exercise. I go to work. I'm in finance. I mean, he's got a wonderful wife. And, you know, when they were most excited that they were going to have their first child, they lost that child.
Hmm.
And very soon after, he developed a very bizarre neurological condition
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
hasn't been figured out. And so right now it's so right on in Spanish there's this in la flor de la piel, it's like right on the tip of my skin, that this humbling
Mm,
of something that is just so out of his control, out of my control, out of our family's control to do anything about.
hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And um and and I think we've talked different things about this in the past, but that experience, at least that current one, is an example of how that can bring us closer. Some of the gifts that come out of that
Yeah.
for my family. Now, not every challenging experience brings us closer. Some drive us apart.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that is one of the gifts of the suffering, in my case, in his case,
Hmm.
is the tenderness and the closeness that has developed for our family through
Yeah.
his pain, through our pain together.
Which is another gift of that pain, isn't it? Is
Hmm.
is reminding us that we need each other.
Yeah,
That pain will often, again, humble us so that we can allow care from others.
yeah.
Because I think that's something else we've come to in modernity is this sort of need for hyper independence and
Oh,
not wanting to be needy. This seems to
right.
be a theme in my community is a resistance to being needy, which is something I can relate to, and had to
Yeah.
really grapple with and didn't, I think, grapple with it until dealing with this with my daughter,
Hmm. Hmm.
who, and this can sound strange, but speaking to what you just talked of, early on in our open communication around her identity, there was some real tragedy going on in my family.
Mm.
Um, my baby sister lost her husband to cancer.
Hmm.
She
Hmm.
had four little kids.
Wow.
My brother with a neurological disorder went into a nursing home where he would spend the last few years of his life.
Wow.
And at that point was quadriplegic,
Yeah.
and it just gave me perspective
Yeah.
and even created gratitude for
Exactly.
my problem set. It's like, okay, we can handle this.
Yeah.
And I did send my daughter down to my sister's house to help
Wow.
babysit,
Yeah.
to just give her that taste of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jung said something along the lines of, the greatest tragedy that can happen in a person's life is that it's too easy, that things come
Ugh,
easily
right.
because they will
Isn't that
not develop their
fascinating?
full potential.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's fascinating.
And so, I think there can be one thing I've noticed as we are publishing and people are consuming this content, and there's been much gratitude expressed,
Mm,
for this, is that, we're craving this understanding.
hmm
And it can be kind of a double-edged sword. There
hmm
can, as you're learning about it, you want to do everything right,
Yeah, yeah,
and you think that's even possible, maybe, and that
yeah,
if you do everything right, you're going to turn this ship around, or it's going to have the outcome that you want it to have because
right.
you did it right. There's this sort of, cause and effect. What's the word I want to use here? Promise,
hmm hmm
maybe.
hmm
And I think I would caution a little around that,
hmm hmm hmm
that if we are so attached to our identity as a good mom, like a good mom
hmm
does these things,
hmm hmm hmm
we tend to then not extend ourselves the grace.
Yeah,
We're all human moms. That's what we
yeah,
are. And
yeah.
our kids need us to be human moms.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I know you mentioned to me, before we got on just about one of your community members saying, I wish I could meet Rose's parents.
Mhm.
And that just sort of brought me back to some aspects of my story that I haven't just had a chance to share yet for the series. So I thought I could just kind of touch upon that right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I know the story you're going to tell. And we've had some discussion about this one in the past,
Yeah.
kind of just analyzing maybe how it how it fits into some of the things that we've talked about, some of the concepts that we've shared and encouraged, and whether it aligns. And yeah, I look forward to digging into it and listening to you tell it again and us
Yeah.
exploring. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. So one of the things I feel like you and I bounce back and forth a lot is this idea that, you have shared with me, and I think you've shared on the podcast that many of the parents that you work with, have built a strong attachment with their children,
Hmm.
them towards their children towards them. Um, and how when we talk about just the ideological, the cultural time that we're living in around gender ideology and this, whether it's just the social justice ideology as a whole or this particular kind of temptation or this particular offering that the trans identity can off, can pull people into, or
Hmm.
pull, children, young
Hmm.
adults into, is so powerful, and so it's like as much as we can try to do, there's things that we may, that are out of our control,
Yeah.
and so that's, you know, when I think back to me, and I think I've spoken to this many times in different ways, but just, I'll just share it kind of from a slightly different perspective this for today. It's like when I was a teenager, I was so rebellious. Okay.
Hmm.
I was an extremely rebellious teenager, but I also wanted to be good. I wanted to be good so badly. I can't remember if I shared this before, but I go back to like I was raised Catholic, so I was going through the confirmation process, and I remember going away to a retreat. We didn't really have we had a youth group at my church. We just CCD. We didn't do like the fun stuff that my Protestant friends did. Like I went to a Lutheran summer camp because it was fun.
Mm,
We got to
okay.
canoe. I was always like jealous of my Lutheran friends growing up. So, but we did get to do this confirmation retreat. And I was like a very devout child. I've had a
Mm,
very strong connection to God from a very young age. And I remember going on this retreat and I was kind of like the only one who was into it amongst my peers.
okay.
Randomly, I also remember like my friend had like liquid eyeliner. This is one of my memories of this retreat. Like she put this like black liquid. I was like shocked by how strong this eyeliner was. So there was like this competing like attachment, we could say. Like I was in that peer culture
Mm,
with my friend group putting on this dark black liquid eyeliner, but I was also like, I'm here because I'm getting confirmed. Like I have this very strong connection to learning about the mass and these particular parts of the mass that were so powerful to me. And I was like the only one who was into it, you know. But I remember at the time my parents all the parents had been asked to write their kids a letter, and I didn't know it was coming. And I don't remember what the letter said, but I remember going into a bathroom stall to read it and I could cry, but
mm,
I was just like so moved
mm.
by my parents.
So it was vulnerable to read the letter. That's why
Oh
you're in the
yeah,
bathroom
well,
stall.
because
Okay.
totally nobody, I mean, none of my peers appeared to care what their parents
Right.
had written them.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't cool to cry about something
Mm,
like that.
hmm
I remember going into that bathroom stall just to have the privacy of being able to be moved
mm,
emotionally by kind of this rite of passage, is really what confirmation I think is. And so that was kind of one trajectory of my life. But at the same time, I was incredibly rebellious. And, I sought out, my boyfriend with whom I was going to eventually, have sex for the first time against my mother's desperate wishes.
hmm
I did a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, a lot of lying and deception to my parents.
hmm
So when I eventually went off to college, I took like a gap year, broke up with that boyfriend, which was a good thing. Very much I was driven by this need for that physical proximity, attachment of the senses.
hmm
Like I hadn't really developed deeper attachments, but because I was still so driven by that physical proximity.
Mm, okay.
But then I go away to college, right? I go away to college and you know, my entire first year I spent wanting to go home. I missed home. I had a
Yes.
younger brother who was 12 years younger than me. I wanted to go back home. And I even went so far as applying to the local 4-year university near where my parents lived, got accepted. I signed up for classes, but then, life happened. And
hmm
for whatever reason, I ended up falling in love with another guy who
hmm
was from where had gone away to college. And so I kind of decided to go back. I decided to go back and he was moving back and we both moved back together. And that year was really that was my sophomore year. That's when I really started to get into activism.
hmm
I was already an activist, like even in high school, I was like writing letters to the editor to the underground school newspaper about feminism. And, it's like I was already an environmentalist, like I already had that streak in me, that activist streak. So, but it was the next year when I went back that fall, I had met a friend who was organizing this bus trip um to go to this protest. And I had to after my teenage rebellion, I had come back to a closer relationship with my parents. Obviously, I spent the entire first year of college just missing them, wanting to be home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I reached out to them and I said, I want to go to this protest. I want to, go protest US military intervention in Latin America. That's what it was about. It was this military school, and there was this big protest there. It was like really growing during the late 1990s, early, right around 2000. This was a big activist thing to do. And so I asked them if I could go. And my dad basically said, I did not send you to college to become an activist.
Mm.
And if you go, I am going to stop paying for half of your college. He was going to pay half, I paid half. Um, and so I
Okay.
was faced with this decision, like, do I disobey my parents, who I've finally stopped being rebellious towards,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
or do I not go and do this thing that I believe so strongly in? So listeners will probably guess that what choice I made. But I remember my boyfriend at the time was like, why are you doing it? You're doing it for other people. Like, what is it for you?
Mm.
And I kind of came to this very strange thing where it was like a memory from my childhood where I felt like my parents had lost their temper with my little brothers. It's just so interesting. All these things that
Oh yeah.
who knows why we carry these things in our psyches. But I went
Uh-huh.
back like that was wrong and that was important to me. And so I need to do this protest.
Okay.
So I ended up lying to my parents. And it's interesting looking back. Go ahead. What are you going to ask?
Well, I'm curious about the lying to your parents
Oh, I told them I wasn't going to
part.
go.
You told them so you went behind their backs
Totally. Yep.
to keep the funding,
Yep.
the college funding?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
And also their esteem. I mean, it was not just the money, it was also yeah. So
Okay.
this is you kind of know where I'm going here. Like the theme, there's multiple themes, but the money piece is a part of this, right? So
And all that part was new to me, by the way. So
yeah, 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 yeah. Just a
I
little
can
more.
relate to lots of it.
Okay.
So it's interesting how similar people's arcs can be, as they're
Yeah,
coming of
yeah,
age. But
yeah,
yeah, okay, go ahead.
exactly. So it was not, I felt okay about it eventually, but I do now in my 40s, having healed this relationship, I do go back to that choice. I've given more thought to that choice and that trajectory in the past 3 years than I have, any other time in my life.
Hmm.
So I did that, and I kind of, people kind of know some of my story from there. Like I got way more into activism. I really solidified kind of that more the peer relationships at college, but I still had a, pretty good relationship with my parents. But as probably many listeners can relate, like when I'd come home from college, it'd be like, you guys are doing everything wrong. You're way too materialistic. Oh, look at all this waste. Like I had been an avid snowboarder. I like gave away my snowboard, because it was too privileged, all of these different things. It was really like, I am going to save the world. I really got into that mode. And I
Hmm.
stayed in that mode really for kind of like 20 years or more, more or less. But so, people know kind of this a lot of my story in that interim in terms of like when I got super into anti-racism and woke stuff. My coming out process was in terms of my sexuality was woven within that.
Hmm.
And that was kind of I'd had this ideological wedge driven between me and my parents with just the activism and the ideology. But oh my goodness, when I came out, then that was like a real, irreconcilable difference. And so
Mm.
once I fell in love with my wife, we did go through a period of estrangement, couple years, because at that time my mom specifically, and my parents in general said, we won't have any homosexuals in our house.
Mm.
So they kind of laid down that line, and I was like, I'm not gonna, I felt in me at that, like this, I found my home. And there's some movie quote that I can't remember what movie it was from, but it's kind of like this whole idea of like you find your home, the color's wrong, the paint's all off, but you find your home. So it's like, my wife came to me as this unexpected package,
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
the person I thought I would fall in love with and
Mm-hmm.
spend the rest of my life with, but someone who felt like home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I chose her, I chose her and I,
Mm-hmm.
went into this first period of estrangement with my parents. When my son was born, we reconciled. My parents and I and my wife reconciled. I basically said, you can have a relationship with me and my son as long as you accept my partner. And they did. They did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We didn't fully reconcile that, but she was welcome,
Okay.
in the family home. And so once we kind of a few years later thought our son was transgender, did the social transition, changed his name and pronouns, it was like my framework that I had was that my parents had said, they had put this ultimatum down, which caused that initial estrangement.
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, this is the same thing where I demanded that they accept my partner. Well, now I'm going to demand that they
Right.
accept my son
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing
or
you
my
you
trans
you
daughter.
laying down some ultimatums as
Then
well.
I did the ultimatum. I didn't think I
Mm-hmm.
was, but I knew I was doing an ultimatum, but I felt like they had the first one, that they weren't going
Mm-hmm.
to address him with his new name and pronouns. So I didn't, I now know it was mine, but then I didn't totally get that part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, so then we went through like a very real estrangement. And that was like, about 3+ years where on and off we would text message or email. But as I really held that line, if you don't, everybody knows the script in
Yeah.
this community. I didn't know it was a script, but I gave them the script. Like
But you never went no contact.
we never went no contact completely. No,
Okay.
no, no. That's a great clarifying question. So, but I would go back home to visit each summer, would never see my parents. I'd see my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had this parallel, me and my brothers kind of had this parallel family almost. And I had to, I went through my own struggles around like part of me really wanted them to cut my parents out too. Like, were they being loyal to me? I had to do
Yes.
kind of my
Mm-hmm.
own growing up in
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like, you know, so all this to say, even though I look back and I'm like, boy, I was like so wrong about so much. Even within that, I was still kind of growing up. I was
Yes.
making these baby steps,
Yes.
like there was things that I always questioned that I never felt, I've spoken about this in other interviews and writing, but like there was always ways that I doubted or questioned, but it took me a long time to really allow myself to go fully into the things that didn't feel right to me. But so
Like being
anyway,
able to acknowledge and shift those things. Is that what you mean by going fully into?
yeah, not just like
Okay.
write them off as like, no, I just need to do this harder. If
Yeah.
I'm doubting, it just means I need to exert more coercion on myself
Uh-huh.
to
Uh-huh.
stick with the program,
Uh-huh. Okay. Yes.
versus like, no, listen to your doubts. Like,
Which I think many of us think are boundaries. All right. So,
yeah.
okay. Mm-hmm.
So long story short, I feel like I still, had some redeeming aspects of in so many ways of that time. Um, and I want to make sure to acknowledge those as I tell, these pieces of my story. But so at some point, probably about 3 years into that estrangement, my uncle dies.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my godmother's husband, and he was just a very precious human being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he just had his birthday a few weeks ago. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of fresh in my mind. I just saw my godmother a few weeks ago too. So So I kind of reconnected with my parents as he was in the hospital. He had a heart attack,
Mm-hmm.
sudden, kind of totally out of the blue. He had been jogging, came back to his house and fell on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So his daughter, my cousin, happened to be with my parents when this happened, and they drove her back home to be with her dad. And so this opened up some channels of texting with me and my brothers, and it was kind of this opening for me to say, um, tell my uncle goodbye for me. I asked my mom to do that for me, which was a very big deal at the time, like a very big deal for me to have that level of vulnerability and trust for her.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
I want to take a moment to link this back to what you were talking about in the beginning
yeah,
about how tragedy and pain softens us and brings us together.
yeah, yeah.
It is an opportunity to repair bridges.
I know. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah. I so yeah, so in the midst of some of this closeness opening up, like you're speaking to, my dad offered to fly me to the funeral,
Mm-hmm.
which I accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
stayed in my own Airbnb. I kind of kept my distance from my parents somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
through this whole thing. And I'm there at the wake, and my family always has had this beautiful tradition, my mom's side, where the wake always becomes the storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was this really interesting experience for me and very healing in a lot of ways. I'm still in the ideology. I show up
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I'm just going to be all of who I am. I'm going to show people who I think disagree with me completely pictures of my transgender daughter. I'm going to be out and proud. I'm going to be all these things. Um, but I'm still going to be able to integrate with what I love so much about my family. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the dysfunction is rampant, but yet someone dies and you gather and you tell stories. And I sat with my godmother, um, sorry, as
Mm-hmm.
they prayed the
It's
rosary
okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and held her.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my uncle coming up to me. My mom is one of like 11 or 12 siblings, and I always forget what the actual number is. But her eldest brother came up to me after the rosary and just said, "It's so special that you're here. You're the eldest granddaughter."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So so it was just a very powerful experience, to get to that place where I felt I was like, I'm gonna be me, I'm gonna hold strong, but I can also integrate what I love about who I come from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my dad and mom and I talked just very briefly at like the family gathering the next day, and I was very cold. I mean, just, I was very distant. I kind of talked matter of factly, but I wasn't really budging, that much emotionally. And a couple months later, my dad sent me, every year he'll send me, and I'm sure my brothers too, like a birthday check for, and it's not a ton of money, but it's a ritual that he has where he gives us, money for our birthdays of, a few
Mm-hmm.
$100s, a lot of money to some people, maybe not a ton of money to others, but like, he sent me that kind of traditional check, and I didn't cash it right away. I held on to it for whatever reason. I just didn't have time to get to the bank or whatever. And in the interim, I went home again, drove across the country to go home with my family, was going to gather with my brothers in kind of that parallel family formation. And my dad reached out to me and he said, I know you're coming home. I would love to see you. I imagine you're really sad about our, you know, not seeing each
Mm-hmm.
other. I know I am, could I see you?
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason in that moment, I was like, I'm gonna just be who I am, I'm gonna be firm. And I wrote him an email back basically saying, you know, you and mom did the best you could with me, but you never understood who I truly was. I have tools that you don't have to understand my own child. And basically I was like, you can't see us.
Mm,
I was very self-righteous and drew this ultimatum,
mm-hmm,
you know, and said, no,
mm-hmm,
you can't see me. You can't see my family. You can't see your grandchildren. So, and then I didn't hear back from him after that. And maybe like a month or two later, I go to the bank and I'm like, oh,
mm-hmm,
got my birthday check. And I I go to cash it and it bounces.
mm-hmm,
And I text my dad and I say, I just went to the bank, the check bounced. Um, I'm wondering if you canceled it. And he was like, yeah, I
mm-hmm,
canceled the check.
mm-hmm,
And then kind of unfolded, like, I would say, like 48 hours of me just sitting with this.
yeah.
And um, I guess it so happened that I had just done the Neufeld Intensive 2 called Separation Complex. It talks all about those primal
Mm,
separation emotions of
mm-hmm,
um, pursuit,
mm-hmm,
trying to close the gap when facing separation, frustration, trying to change, elicit change, when
mm-hmm,
fix what's not working.
mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, what's the last one? Pursuit, frustration, and what am I forgetting?
Alarm? Are you talking about
Alarm.
the? Okay.
Alarm. Thank you. Yeah. And I just remember sitting with those three.
Mm,
And I remember riding in the passenger seat of the car, with my eyes closed, and just with that visual in my mind of that facing separation, those emotions. And for the first time, once the money was removed,
mm-hmm,
the transaction,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was able to like feel
Yeah.
the separation.
Yeah.
And I do, it's not a straight line. Like none of this is a straight line, but I do feel that that was one of the openings
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
that helped me
Yeah.
along my path. It wasn't like my dad canceling the check um made me roll back social transition for my son, but it was like one of the bricks coming out of the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the part of the story that I have heard before and grappled with a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
Hearing it again, I can really, I think, feel
yeah,
what you're describing
yeah.
and how canceling that check was symbolic.
Yeah,
There was it's symbolic of the separation that you were creating,
totally.
essentially,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
also making me think back to that question we had about alpha versus doormat,
hmm hmm
where your dad was probably feeling pretty abused.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, I did reach back once my tears started to trickle, and I'm telling you, this was a trickle.
Mm, okay.
Like this, I had been dry-eyed
Mm,
about the estrangement to my parents for years.
mm-hmm,
Dry-eyed. Okay. I had a
mm-hmm,
lot of dreams about it. where I was trying to convince them, I was trying to persuade them to see it my way. And those were, if there's such thing, we've heard about anxiety dreams. If you've, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
this is a different category. This is called a futility dream. Like it was like I
Mm,
would have repetitive dreams of like pleading with them to understand me, and they just wouldn't budge. And and so I had, it's not that I hadn't struggled and been torn apart by this. I truly felt torn apart, but I was dry-eyed
Can
and
can can we pause? I'm sorry.
yeah,
I think we need
yeah.
to help listeners make sure they understand why you keep saying dry-eyed and what that means.
I I I I I didn't cry about it.
So would is because you were defended? Is that what we
Yeah,
mean by
I would
dry-eyed?
I would
Okay.
suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I feel like
That's kind of what
I had
I
no
just want to make
access
clear
to the
is
grief.
yes, and that
Yeah,
that is a sign of that, right? That
totally. I didn't know it
tears are
though. Oh my
important.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought I was feeling the whole time.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
it wasn't till this trickle. This is when in my, at least what I can recollect or speak to, looking back, this is when I actually accessed grief
Mhm.
for the first time
Beginning with a trickle.
with a trickle. And I did reach back out to my father, and I did
Mhm.
apologize. I apologized to him
Mhm.
for the email I had sent,
Mhm.
and I did put it in like Neufeld terms. I said, I am sorry that I've become hard-hearted to you,
Mm,
and this has helped me to soften my heart, and I love you, and I'm sorry.
mm, mhm,
And he opened right back up.
mhm, mhm. And I can see that moves you still, that he opened right back up. And it sounds like you needed a wake-up call.
I did. I needed a wake-up call, and it wasn't like his wake-up call was coming to me around the trans thing. It was
Mhm,
a wake-up call of like, what is this actually about?
mm, mhm, mhm,
Because I do think that I had developed a transactional perspective towards my parents.
mhm,
Are they still going to put me in their will
mhm,
or not? I don't
mhm.
know. But I think
This is
because
where
I
money
looked,
complicates things.
this is exactly why I told the story originally, and then I wanted to come back to it. It was like, because I was so defended to them
Mhm,
emotionally, the financial aspect became sort of the definition
mhm.
of my whatever relationship I still had, in my
Like the
mind.
symbol of it, is that kind
Yeah,
of
or
what you're
just the reality
saying?
of it. I mean, it
Yeah,
was,
okay, okay.
you
The
know,
definition. Okay, because I know that
what I
lots,
thought about. It's what I thought about.
it's what you thought about. Yeah. And I do think parents often suspect that it is those purse strings or that checkbook that does keep their child invested in the relationship
Yeah, I
of
mean, this is why
Rose's.
I'm
Yeah,
telling this story, because I'm like,
yeah,
let's have real talk, baby.
yeah,
And I'm not a bad person. Like
yeah.
I know all of me, it, but like I think this is helpful to see it through some of
Hmm.
these frameworks of defendedness, because it
Hmm.
it doesn't mean your child is bad. It doesn't mean I was
Right,
bad.
right.
It was the place I was in.
Yeah, life was happening around you. Hmm.
So the reason, and I want to talk a little bit more, and kind of bring everyone up to speed, because there's another aspect of my relationship to my parents that I do want to speak to, because I do think it's important for people to know. But I guess the reason why I told this story before and why I'm telling it again today is, in theory, we could say my dad did the wrong thing. In
Well,
theory.
let's why? Why would it be
Well,
the
because
wrong thing?
this generous invitation,
Yeah.
well,
Hmm.
he was generous and generous and generous and
Hmm.
generous.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
So
and
this could feel a little coercive, I guess, is
then it was
right.
like
Like,
it's our punishment,
yes,
or like,
yes,
I'm cutting you out.
yes, yes.
But at the end of the day, for whatever reason,
Hmm.
it was exactly what he needed to do.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
For him, it was certainly what he needed to do, but it ended up also helping me.
Hmm. He needed it for his own self-respect
Totally.
so that he didn't feel
His
like a
own
doormat.
dignity.
Yes, his own
Yeah.
dignity. Yes.
Yeah. And then the ripple effect, which I would have never,
Yeah.
who could have guessed, was that I softened enough towards him
Hmm.
that I was able to trickle out some tears.
Yeah.
It's like the dam was like, the water's building up behind that dam.
Yes. 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 The ocean of grief that you mentioned last time that is now trapped in the body
Yeah.
and
Which
needs
later
to
would
come
burst
out.
and flow. Yeah,
Yeah.
over like the past
Yes.
few years. Yeah, exactly.
And I think this is an important story, and I still want to
Yeah,
share some words of caution, that yes, this is what you needed. This is what your dad needed. You needed to have that embodied experience of separation to snap you
exactly.
back into reality,
Yep. Yep.
and he needed it for his dignity. And I want us, I would still not encourage parents to use their money as, um,
Communication or
yeah,
or a tool of coercion or
yes, yes.
yeah. I don't
To,
think that's what he did it
I
for.
don't think so either. I
Right.
don't think so either. I hear
Yeah.
something different in that story, but
Mhm.
I just want to be careful that parents don't hear it that way.
Right.
Yeah,
Totally. This
yeah,
was not about him trying to change my mind.
right.
It was him just saying, I've had enough.
Or even to punish you.
No,
It wasn't
no, I
about
don't think
that.
he was punishing me.
Yeah.
I think he had to stand up for himself.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
And I think he was very hurt. I think he was
Hmm.
very, very hurt.
Hmm.
And he
Well,
had
and
had
yeah,
never showed it. I'm sure he had been in other ways, for a long time. And
yeah.
yeah. And I'm
There's
not saying
part,
it's perfect. I'm just saying this is what happened. This is
yeah,
how it played out for us.
right. Well, yeah. And it comes back to that whole human business,
Mm-hmm.
and that idea that you can do everything right or what you think is right.
Mm-hmm.
And something else might be the right thing.
Exactly.
And right and wrong, I don't like using those words anyway, because it's so hard to know in the moment how
Yeah.
this thing is going to play out. We
Yeah.
are all making mistakes all the time, and sometimes they're for the best. And
Yeah.
we don't know it in the moment, or the lesson we need to learn is in that mistake, like you said. Like it can be those very things that develop us
Yeah.
the most, and
Exactly.
so um I want to backtrack to
Yeah.
another part of the story,
Okay.
just because I think this could be helpful for some mamas to hear.
Yeah.
You talked about you even used the word deception, or I was
Mm.
deceptive. I
Mm-hmm.
went behind my
Mm-hmm.
parents' back
Mm-hmm.
on this thing. And I think parents can feel really wounded when they experience, especially when it's obvious my kid is lying to me.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
but understanding what would drive that deception, I think
Mm.
it's often experienced as a betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
But like you
Yeah.
said, you didn't want to disappoint them.
Yeah.
Their esteem mattered to you.
Yeah.
It was very complex, and
Totally.
it's what you thought you had to do at
Right.
that point in your life,
Yeah.
that it wasn't something personal,
No, 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 no. Yeah.
And
Not
that
at
we will,
all. Yeah.
sometimes we do that to protect our parents. I think we are deceptive because we don't think they can handle really knowing what we're doing or what we're up to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was up to a lot of naughty things too as a teenager and young adult, things that my parents would not approve of,
Mm-hmm.
and I, I didn't want them to know about it. And it was, I'm sure it was attachment.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of that attachment related stuff,
Mm-hmm.
pursuit of um, getting my needs met in unhealthy ways.
Totally.
But
Totally.
too, you bring up your worldviews,
Mm-hmm.
and different generations have different worldviews. And it is, especially in modernity again,
Mm-hmm.
each generation has a new understanding of how the world works. And it is often very different from the parents' understanding. And that is going to create separation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's nobody's fault.
Right.
Still hurts.
Yeah.
We're still driven to find who's to blame and fix it, I think,
Right. Right.
but the bottom line is, and then there's life.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the context for all of this work.
Yep. 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 And I just want to, like, the last thing that I want to speak to, and
Hmm.
again, because I want parents listening to hear this,
Hmm.
um, is both at the same time how, I mean, what a gift. And I feel like I've spoken to this often, but it just what a gift the healing of my relationship with my parents has been. Profound,
Hmm.
profound gift that did break open those floodgates of grief that I had been defended against holding inside for so long. I didn't even know it was there until it
Hmm.
started to flow.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and so on the one hand,
Hmm.
amazing gift of healing. And
Hmm.
on the other hand, where my and I just want to, like, where my parents and I both had to ask for forgiveness, both had to move towards one another.
Hmm. Hmm.
And on the other hand, I just, they absolutely do not accept my marriage.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there is a tension.
That's worldviews again. Hmm.
There is a tension. But there is nothing, like, I think I have come to this place. I went on a walk with an old friend just this past week, had not seen her. The last
Hmm.
time we went on a walk was like when I was reeling coming out of, rolling back social transition. I was sharing with her about it. I remember standing at the edge of my driveway and just saying, like, at the end of the day, we're telling kids they can change sex and they can't change sex. And she just stopped in her tracks and looked at me and said, "Do you really believe that?" Like, she was shocked that I didn't believe changing sex was possible. Like, it was one of those moments that is just like etched
Hmm.
into my memory about that
Hmm.
my whole journey coming out of the ideology and then realizing how deep others are within it and coming face to face with that reality. Anyways, I had not walked with this friend for like 4.5 years. And here we are going on a walk.
Hmm.
And I told her about healing the relationship with my parents. And she was just like, wow, that's amazing. What do you think did it?
Hmm.
And I did say, I had to acknowledge my mistakes. We
Hmm.
both had to ask for forgiveness,
Hmm.
both had to come together. And then I said, I know they're not happy with my marriage. And she said, oh, it's just like homophobia. And I was like, no,
Hmm.
it's not. It is their it is their devout faith,
Mm-hmm.
it's not homophobia. And I was like, I know where you're coming from because I used to see it that way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I don't anymore at all. Like there's not even a bone in my body that sees it that way anymore.
Mm.
But like
Yes.
I have had to stretch, and my partner has
Mm-hmm.
had to stretch. And it's like so I share this because, but so have my parents.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone to mass with them where the priest says, if you let an unmarried couple stay in your house, you're committing a mortal sin. I mean, the fact that
Mm-hmm.
they allow my partner and I under their roof at all
Mm-hmm.
is like a huge ask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and so who am I? And I said this to my friend. I said, who am I to tell them to let go of their devout religious faith for me? I'm like,
Right.
the arrogance, like, so all of this is to say, I share this because I don't want my story to sound like this perfect fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I have healed this relationship with my parents, that everything is easy, because it's not.
Right. Right.
It's not easy.
Uh-huh.
It is incredibly difficult. It is incredibly difficult to have that tension exist, but there is nothing to be done except just live within it.
And isn't that's maturity? That is recognizing not separation, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
but that you they're allowing you to be you and they are
Yeah.
stretching to make space for how different you see the world. And I think, we were talking a little bit about this, that when somebody else's reality is so threatening to us that we have to shut it down, that is, I think, indicative of the state of attachment in the world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the
Yep.
level of defendedness and, this that we are not developing our adaptation capacity, our tolerance for things that are very different from what we think they should be. And we're, that I think another reason you and I are so passionate about this work
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
because we can see the way people are with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and because of it, it for me, it's like this is my lifeline to be able to say, on the one hand,
Yeah.
I have healed this in profound ways, and on the other hand, it's always going to be challenging.
Yes. Yes.
And that, it helps me to be able to navigate that tension, uh, and
Hmm.
be okay that it can't be resolved because it's very difficult. And I do share this with the imaginings of a parent whose child is medically transitioning, has medically transitioned. This
Hmm.
may be something that you can never feel good about,
Hmm. Hmm.
never agree with, never come to peace with.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that you can't heal your relationship with your child.
Hmm. Hmm.
My parents have done it with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. This is incredibly profound, I think, to the state of things, relevant to the state of things in today's world. Can we do it for our own family members?
Yeah, right. And kind of coming full circle, it's like, I started off by when we're talking about being humbled, and I told the story of my brother. The closest that my family has would never have been able to be there if it wasn't for the way that my that I reintegrated.
Mm.
I can't even imagine living this whole experience in a parallel family grouping,
Yeah.
and so it's just, I'm so grateful um to be where we are, even amidst the challenge, you know.
So then, yeah, and I hear you. This is relative to the whole family system,
Hmm.
that it is deep into the connection. The
Yes,
healing has deepened the connection,
absolutely. The grief,
the
I think,
grief. Yeah.
yeah. Hmm. Because nobody takes it for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We don't take each other for granted at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was something else that I lost right there at the end. Oh well. Okay. Hmm. It was the wounding,
Mm,
you know, and that I think y- thinking of that emotional wounding and how if it scars over, and becomes
mm,
defended and
yeah,
brittle and you'll never hurt me this way again, I'll never allow it. I think it can be one pathway.
yeah, yeah,
And that what the to allow the healing that happened in your family requires that softness
yeah,
and the tears and the grief that you
yeah,
described. We have to be able to tolerate the grief,
yeah,
and it hurts. Yeah. And um, yeah, that's another reason this work becomes so important, I think, to both of us,
yeah, yep, yep,
and why our focus remains on the attachment and families.
yep, yep, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So,
So we will continue.
yes, we will be
As we
back.
wrap up this kind of episode in this series, it's like, I think that's so well said that's why we're coming back for more.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like. That's some of the work that we'll be doing when we're not recording episodes, is imagining what the Attachment Matters platform essentially is going to look like. Um, and there's lots of imagining to do. So
yeah,
yeah, we'll keep you posted.
yeah. And I just want to say, as we wrap up here, one of the things I wanted to, when we're brainstorming, what should we talk about today, is just like one of the things I was thinking was like, how has the series impacted me, doing this?
Mm,
And I again, I know I've said this in the past, but I'm just so grateful because I still get swept up in all of you know, the temptations of like the culture war and the politics, and it's just part of my nature. But um, I feel like when we do these episodes, when we, have these conversations, I always walk away with a new tenderness and a new
mm,
opening. And it has just been such a gift to me to be able to do this. And I'm so grateful. I'm just really, really grateful.
yeah, me too. Me too. And want to also extend the gratitude from the moms who have personally expressed their gratitude for this content.
Yeah,
That it can be world changing because it changes our inner world.
it does.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Mhm. So we can be in life together.
Yeah. Yeah. And me being in conversation about this and sharing and reflecting and softening and having my tears, as we record,
Mhm.
I'm going to go pick up my children at the end of the school day a different person to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
carry this with me, just like hopefully it's world changing for the moms. Like it's world changing for me just to keep talking about it and
Yes.
sharing, because it brings me back to the place where I want to be to my own children. It's
Yes.
so easy to lose track of it.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yes. And that's what they need from us most is our openness,
Mhm.
our softness, our capacity. Yeah. And life will give us many opportunities to develop it.
Yes. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rose.
All right. Thank you.
And we'll see everybody
Yeah. Have a great end
next
of
year. Yeah.
your year, wonderful holiday season, and we'll
I
be
will
back
have to
soon.
say, yeah, may your holiday season be rich with opportunity.
Yeah. Our hearts, may your hearts remain soft.
Yes, with whatever the holiday season brings your way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. We'll
Right.
see you in 2025.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for tuning into season 1 of this podcast about attachment and relationships. Rose and I will be taking a break from recording episodes as we explore ways to bring you more attachment content and resources. Happy holidays to everyone, and we'll return in 2025 with season 2 and all new episodes of Attachment Matters.